everyone, and welcome to another session of the Live Learning Forum. It is very great to have you with us today. As you may already know, if you've been here before, this forum is a space to share experiences and collaborate on developing and testing living evidence partnerships. And today we have two fantastic presentations on living evidence in education and the evidence ecosystem across Cameroon, Kenya, and Malawi. So if we could move on to the agenda slide, please. Maybe pressure, yes, thank you. So here's a quick overview of today's session. We'll begin with a 20-minute presentation from our speakers, followed by 20 minutes Q&A. And after that, we'll take 10 minutes to discuss concrete ways to move forward based on what we've heard. And finally, we will wrap up outlining some next steps and how you can stay engaged with the Alive Learning community. We can move on. Well, welcome from me. A little bit about myself. My name is Daniela Garcia Villamil. I work as a consultant at the intersections of research and practice, and I am currently focused on reimagining education and work for well-being. My background is in international law and human rights with additional training in sustainability. And I am a keen learner and fan of the living evidence model since I learned about it. So I'm truly excited to be hosting this session today. Moving on. If you could move on to the next slide. Yes. So we're very happy to be joined today by two great speakers, Dr. Rigobert Pambe and Dr. Charles Gachoki. Mr. Pambe is a seasoned technical and vocational education and training teacher, researcher, and development practitioner with over a decade of experience in evidence generation, synthesis, implementation, and dissemination within the education sector across sub-Saharan Africa. As the deputy lead of programs at eBASE Africa, he has been instrumental in mobilizing educational evidence across the Lake Chad Basin countries, and his work emphasizes the importance of contextually relevant evidence to inform policy and practice, aiming to bridge the gap between research and actionable educational strategies. Then we have Dr. Gachoki. He's a distinguished education economist and researcher, currently serving as the research manager for the evidence synthesis and translation at the Zizi Afrique Foundation. He also lectures in the School of Economics at Kenyatta University, specializing in applied economics. And Dr. Gachoki focuses on enhancing the use of evidence in education policy and practice across Africa. He has authored insightful publications on topics such as teacher-generated evidence and the characteristics of homeschooling households in Kenya. So we can move on to the objectives of our session today. So we expect at least 3 things to happen today. First, we would like that we all learn about living evidence partnerships being developed in education. Second, we want to find a little bit more about the evidence ecosystem in the 3 African countries, Cameroon, Kenya, and Malawi. And finally, we hope that at the end of the session, we can identify together with your participation also areas for lesson sharing and collaboration across the Alive Learning Forum. Finally, a few reminders to help the session run smoothly. If we could move on to the next slide. So help us make the session a success. Please keep microphones off until invited to unmute. The session is recorded and will be shared online. And you have been also added to our mailing list for future events. So if you want, you can unsubscribe from that list anytime. If you have any queries about the forum or the sessions, you can please contact the email that is there. So hello@aliveevidence.org. And finally, if you need translation, we're using Wordly. I've seen that some of you have already enabled it. So others, if you need translation, you can take maybe a screenshot of the instructions. If you don't know how to use it, you can click the link to open the window that should be at the top right corner of your screen and choose your preferred language. That said, before we pass on to our speakers, I would like to encourage you all to think about what resonates during the presentation, what questions come up for you, and where you see opportunities to engage in the discussion. We have had very interesting discussions previously, so please jot down any comments, don't hold back with your questions. And if you prefer, you can also drop them in the chat during the presentations, and I'll read them aloud on your behalf when we get to the Q&A. So now, let's dive in. Dr. Gachoki, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and I'm honored to be here. I hope I'm audible. If Daniela would nod, always, yeah, thank you. That tells me that I'm audible. I'll be taking you through what we've been able to do. I'm seated together with Rigobert. We also have counterparts in Malawi who are not present with us, but we did this work in the three countries. If you could allow me, I'll share my slides. So that, yeah, if the other share can be removed so that I can be able to share. Yes, that's fine. That's fine. I can work with this. So this work is funded by under GPE Kicks by IDRC. So we are within the data cohort. This applied research. So we are within the bigger Kicks project. This is implemented in three countries, Kenya, Malawi, and Cameroon, and implemented by 5 partners. Zizi Afrique is one of them, eBASE Cameroon is the other, University of Malawi Center of Education, Research and Training, NTech Hub, and ESA. We consider NTech Hub and ESA as the technical partners, while the top partners, Zizi and University, UNIMA and eBASE are actually the country implementing partners. Next slide. Yeah, so there. Now, the purpose of the Unlocking Data Initiative, the way this work was conceived is such that we were supposed to look at what does the ecosystem look like? What does the foundational learning ecosystem look like? And at this point, I would want to define what the foundational learning space was scoped, that is ages 4 to 10. The official entry age into these three countries is fairly 4 years. That is the official school entry age. And then you have the pre-primary education, age 4 and 5, then 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10. That is the scope we are talking about. So when we talk about the ecosystem, it is good to define that range. So we were tasked with mapping the ecosystem within that region, that is the three countries. And this is what we mapped: policies, data, how does evidence flow, and what is the knowledge developed in that. That is what research exists within that ecosystem. Daniela? And the foundational learning, under the policy map, what we found is that there are too many policies with only elements of foundational learning. And again, I insist that only elements of covering ages 4 to 10. Let me give an example. Like, we have basic education acts or policies in the three countries and many African countries. But this covers a whole range of years. Yet, what has the world is focusing on is being able to read, being literate and enumerate at age 10. Therefore, there's no policy that covers that space, but we have many policies covering early childhood education, basic education, which is now primary 1 upwards, or to secondary school, or up to grade, it's a certain grade. So that was an issue there. Then we also don't have specific policies addressing foundational learning, specifically in Kenya and Cameroon. There's some semblance of a policy in Malawi, but in Kenya and Cameroon, there isn't. So we were asked at the CIS in Chicago this year, why do we need a policy? Why we highlight these key important findings? Because governments in Africa fund what is in the policy. They allocate resources based on policy. So if there's no policy, then that means they will not address teacher shortages in foundational stages or allocate money in foundational stages. Another thing we found is that Kenya and Malawi sit in different ministries. You find that foundational learning sits in different ministries and departments. And here, in some instances, it can lie in social services, it can lie in gender, it can lie, it lies different aspects like early childhood, you might find it is not part of the Ministry of Education. It's in a different ministry. So that is also a component that we found that as long as we treat foundational learning as a separate entity, then it cannot be addressed within the larger, and it's like it's outside the education system, while it is part of foundational learning. So those were some 3 key unique findings we found in the 3 countries on policy. Around data, data is either with the national databases, it's either with the national government, 46%. This is particularly in Kenya, and this was fairly the findings in the 3 countries. My colleague is here. And you'll find that we have the 2 aspects, the 2 spheres is where data and databases are. It is either with UNICEF or with the ministry. So it's either national government or international bodies. The international bodies say they get this data from the national database. Then there are others like Macrotrade, CIC, which are not international. We did not classify them as international organizations, but international databases that also collect and correct data on these countries and on the various macro economic variables and other social variables. Then, and this data sits with different people. What came out here is government is basically the biggest custodian of foundational learning data. If you talk about assessment, if you're talking about attendance, if you're talking about enrollment, classrooms and the infrastructure, that capacity is only with the government because there's a school register called every day. So if the government wants to know how many children, if you want to know how many children are in school today on Wednesday, the 28th, the government knows that. So that data sits there. But we will see also why there is a problem now with that data if it is not shared across. The other item we looked at under the ecosystem was the stakeholders and how evidence flows amongst the stakeholders. In this case, we were looking at when you have evidence from, let's say, this ranges from the classroom to all the way up to the ministry and then across the ecosystem, how does that pan out? Daniela, if you could move to my next slide. So what we found is that there are so much power imbalance, such that, for instance, if you have, I've already talked about this, like this data is collected by different entities, stored in different databases and different formats. It is not shared. It's mostly enclosed, yet we are signatories to the open data protocols. It is not shared, therefore it leads to duplication, because if you don't get the data, everyone wants to go back to the field to collect the data. The use of this data is questionable in decision-making because it is not timely. Mostly it's not of good quality or in the right format. The issues of trust. And then government relies on its own data, and sometimes it doesn't also trust its own data. It has to have data. It mostly relies on informal data. Informal data here, we found that it is this data collected by task forces, special committees that are tasked to go for a specific mission. Go and find out how many classrooms we have. And then the government decides, okay, based on this, we are going to build this number of classrooms. It is not documented data. Then there's the policy practice disconnect, where this data that is collected in the classroom never really goes back to inform classroom practices. And I was saying that in the next slide, we have the evidence flow, and this is where now the trust issues come into play. You look at, like I said, this heavy evidence concentration at the ministry, and the flow is strong within itself between ministries, for example, Ministry of Education and Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education and Ministry of Special Programs, and also funders. When funders like UNICEF, Adelback wants data, they are given on a touch of a button, on a call. They get that data quickly. It is very weak. The flow is very weak between classroom, ministries, and universities. For example, why this is important is because universities are the teacher trainers. So it is important that they get data from the classroom to inform future and current and continuous teacher improvement. But that data never gets back to the university, for instance. So there's no sharing of this kind of data between the classroom, the ministry, and the university. It is also sitting in repositories. For example, university repositories across the ecosystem and various other actors. Zizi has a repository and a library. APHRC has, eBASE has some data. These repositories cannot communicate with each other. Then we also found that there are also inherent challenges such as organizational culture, systemic issues, such that there is research in sharing of evidence that hinders its flow from one point to another just because of the system. For example, in Kenya, we've been revising the NEMIS, the National Education Management Information System, almost every other year. So it is always on improvement mode. So it's never settled to share. There's also the issue of capacity of operating this system. We realized that some of these officers don't know how to anonymize data, for example. So they can't operate the system. They don't want to touch whatever is in the system just because of that capacity issue. There's also the legal and technical issues. You realize that funders will fund eBASE or Zizi or University of Malawi to collect data, but there's no legal agreement on how to use or share that data. And there's a price across such that they can even fund various subsequent years to collect the same data, because you are not supposed to use the previous year's data was collected. There was no sharing. And as we speak here, we have a program with Cameroon, which is running Cameroon, South Africa, Senegal, and Kenya. But that data we are still having challenges because funder is saying you cannot access the whole data set. Yet we are partners in this because there was no legal agreement. So those are some of the findings we hand in the evidence and data flow. Then in the knowledge, this is in research, and Daniela, this is in research, the research itself that is carried out. Within the three countries, there's more knowledge generated in Kenya on foundational learning, but that does not mean it is significantly more, but it's just a finding that compared to the other two countries, there's more research carried out in Kenya than Malawi and Cameroon. But this research and across the board, the three countries, the focus is more on literacy than numeracy, socio-emotional skills, among other skills. So you realize that it's more concentrated on literacy. Then the knowledge for the research is concentrated on ages 1 to 3, again, across the board. There are various reasons why I leave grade 1, why I start from grade 1 is because you can see what is below there is ages 4 and 5, which is ECDE, and beyond ages 8 to 10, which I defined as within the scope. There seems to be concentration around that area of grade 1 to 3. Well, we don't want to speculate why, but that's a finding that's where research is, and therefore we may want to ask why is that. There's very little on ECD, out of school refugees and other marginalized groups, especially girls, and nomadic immigrants, nomadic communities. Communities sometimes in Africa, you realize some communities that don't belong in a certain country. These communities that, like the Ogiek who live in the forest, we do not have those kind of studies done. Female authors dominate in Kenya and Cameroon, while male authors dominate in Malawi. I must put a disclaimer here that in this case, we were looking at the first name of first author, gender of the first author. So you realize that females dominate in Kenya and Cameroon, while males dominate in Malawi. A question there again, look at. Cameroon, this was a unique finding. Cameroon is classified as 80% Francophone. That means actually a Francophone country. But the research generated there is published in English. That raises a fundamental question on dissemination, advocacy work, and use of the same in schools. Because at the end of the day, this evidence is supposed to change classroom behavior. So that means that we are concerned with that finding that, well, we might not again speculate, but that sounds strange. And again, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, much of the knowledge generated is gray. We realized that in these countries, master's students and PhD students, these are postgraduate students, are required to publish their work before they graduate. So you realize that much of what we call published work is actually work from PhD and master's thesis. If you read more literature on this, it says most of the manuscripts from these papers are poorly done. In fact, the cruel word is they are of poor quality. Now, when you have that classification, it also puts a question mark also on what we are calling published material, because if, as a supervisor, my students end up publishing that work, and we are struggling also in the case of these students, much of this work is published in the predatory journals. Again, there's a research on by ESA showing that much of the work in the global south has been condemned in the predatory journals. So that means it literally means much of the literature we are talking about is gray literature, not pure literature. So I don't know. You can proceed, Daniel, to the next slide. But what are we doing about this? I mean, I don't need to go about this. So we have come up with recommendations on strengthening data systems, capacity building. Currently, me and Rigobert, we are in an academy to build the capacity on evidence synthesis by government officers and other non-state actors, fostering partnerships and prioritizing holistic focus on foundational learning other than the general basic education. You can proceed to the next. And what are we doing then? You can ask. The idea of starting this work was based on what was the problem. The problem was we have a challenge in the ecosystem with evidence. We don't know which evidence exists, and we don't know how that evidence flows or how it is shared. We have currently, between when we were told we will speak in this forum and now, we have actually developed an evidence gap map for the 3 countries. What I have here is only the evidence gap map for Kenya, but I know we have the 3 evidence gaps. That means we have gone further to refine that literature in foundational learning. Where is the evidence on which outcomes and interventions, and what are the gaps? So therefore, we can now focus research on which areas are under-researched and which areas have no research at all. For instance, I can tell you for sure that we do not have research on built environment. We have a very rare research on how built environment influences foundational learning outcomes. Same thing with school feeding, yet we know school feeding programs go on. We have literature on how it affects the general learning in primary school, for example, in attendance, but we don't have on foundational learning under the parameters I defined earlier. We also have, we cannot be talking about open source data while we are not talking about ourselves. So there are efforts to open data. The Alive Rary open source, if you go there, you'll get data on assessments, which we are part of as a network. That means it's important that we also put this data into an open. It means put the tools there, put the items of assessment there. eBASE running toolkit is a good contextualization of evidence from other continents into the local context. So that has been an important thing that we are doing. So from here, where are we going? The next steps are to develop a research agenda from these evidence gaps. So we are going to build the capacity. As I have said, we have started an academy today that kicks off now to build the capacity of the ecosystem players to be able to identify what is evidence, what is good evidence, how do you use that evidence, how can you improve, how do you develop outputs from that evidence? Because in most cases, government officers can't even tell, well, that this is evidence. When do you use which evidence where? So we are building that capacity. The other item that we are looking for and to in the immediate future is coming up with a research agenda based on the evidence gap maps, develop national research agenda on foundational learning so that we build that capacity in research, capacity in terms of building the numbers. So that's also something else that we are looking for. I think that's the end. Daniel, that is my end of presentation. And Rigobert, with the way we shared this, is I present and he takes over the question. We can find the materials under this website, including the evidence gap maps, the undergoing quality assurance and work. We've developed the DOI, so we expect them to be uploaded within the week or in the near future. So you can get blogs and other materials. And we are happy to be here to hear how we can collaborate moving this and plug in some of these gaps moving forward. Daniel, I don't know how much I busted my time.
You did not.
Sorry if I did.
2 minutes. It was great timing. Thank you so much, Dr. Gachoki, for those very rich insights. I mean, you have mentioned a lot about data collection, data quality. We've heard a bit about how to strengthen the evidence flow in the ecosystem. You've mentioned the question of dissemination, which connects very well maybe with what you mentioned with the concentration of data at the ministry and funders rather than coming back to the classroom and the evidence users. You've mentioned about global challenges. For example, there is very little globally, there is very little about out-of-school children and marginalized groups. It's not only the situation in Africa, so that's a key global challenge. You've mentioned about asymmetries and incentives in the publishing and dissemination areas, which is something also that I've heard repeatedly in recent discussions. And you've mentioned about perhaps under-researched areas, such as the built-in environment. I think with that, I would like to invite our attendees to the Q&A. Please feel free to raise your hand or drop the question in the chat. Is there anything that is still on your mind? Do you see potential ideas for collaboration or something that you would like to learn more about? So I would like to open the floor for the audience. Is there something that resonates with you from our speakers' experiences? And in the meantime, while you're thinking about your questions, maybe I can go ahead with a first one, Dr. Charles. I think that one of the key questions that I would have is if you could pass on one key message from your experience building this data, this evidence ecosystem to others in similar topics, what would it be, Dr. Charles?
Yeah, Daniel, now that's a difficult one. You should
Yes.
have prepared your ask difficult questions. But what is the key message we are taking here is, I think one assumption we have been making in the ecosystem, not only in education ecosystem, but in all ecosystems, is that we have evidence. You know, there's this assumption that there's some evidence, I think the key message I can take is the first step is to do a mapping of both what exists, which players exist, so that you know what do you have, what influence do they have in that ecosystem. So I think a map is one of the key messages, it's one of the most important things that we did. So if you ask me, is to know the ecosystem. This is just a seminar work, so and the ecosystem is evolving and it keeps on changing and shifting. So it is continuous work to keep on relooking at the ecosystem. And what is the ecosystem also saying? It really bothers us that Daniela, and I keep on telling Rigobert, most of us here saw children going to school today. I'm very sure you saw a bus or a child carrying a bag to school, or you can see one now. But do you know that 90%, almost 90% of those children will go home without learning nothing today? So that's something that came out and that really worries us, that over the years, we have been saying children are not learning in sub-Saharan Africa. Children are not learning. So what is there in the ecosystem? What is happening in the ecosystem? And that can only be answered by a robust map and a continuous map and continuous talking about within the ecosystem. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank
I
you.
don't know whether Rigobert wanted to say anything on.
Yes, thanks, Charles. I was boiling to say something about that. Because and it's just to add up to what Charles was saying about mapping and really understanding our environment, understanding our community, understanding what it's available as evidence around us. Because what we learned was that evidence is available, data is available in ministries, but evidence is available in mainstream databases that are generally behind paywalls. But there is also a wealth of knowledge that is available within CSO's repository, available within the universities that are very useful, but that are not actually used to inform policy or to inform practice. So really mapping what is available, what are the types of evidence that are available, what are the types of methods that are used in generating evidence is something that is useful and is something that can inform future research. For instance, we know that most of the research that's available, we do not have randomized control trial, but we have a lot of behavioral interventions that are being evaluated and that are very good pointers to what can actually work in our environment. All these data and all this evidence is locked in silos, is locked within, as I was saying, university repositories within CSO's website. And it's very challenging for us to really leverage on them. So now that we know where they are, now that we know how to find them, it's something that the next step will be how to harness them and help them improve policy and practice. So what was really rewarding within this process is the fact that we did not just stop at the mainstream databases, the ones that we know and the ones that are peer reviewed, the ones that are known globally, but we went right down into looking at what is available within our universities, look at what is available within our local journals and local repository, and in assessing the quality of that work so that it can actually inform our policy and practices.
Thank you, Mr. Pambe. I think we have one question from Fiona. So I think either of you who wants to answer or both of you. She says, you mentioned a problem with the lack of trust of evidence. How can this be changed?
Yeah, so maybe I take that then you continue. So trust is actually at two levels. So the trust is between, I'm going to talk about the stakeholders themselves and that need to use that evidence. I mean, the issue of trust is at the level of the stakeholders, but also at the level of the type of evidence that is being shared. So at the level of the stakeholders, we notice one interesting dynamics, like the policymakers themselves they lack trust in data that was produced by CSOs and by universities by saying that they are not very sure of the rigor of the methodology that they use and of the evidence that they will produce. And on the other hand, the researchers and the CSOs also lack trust in the type of data that the government and policymakers are producing, saying that they will be promoting a particular agenda and they will be sharing only what is favorable to them and not disclose data that would not speak to their the policies that they want to enforce. So, and all of that happens because these various systems work in silos. So one of the key things that we can do to improve that is to bring these particular actors together so that they can share, they can develop common system for data generation and also for data archiving and sharing. Now, level of the trust in terms of the data that is the data or the evidence that is produced. There are several tools that can assess a particular piece of evidence. And we can use those tools. But I think what is much more important, and Charles was saying that in his presentation, is in building capacity for the people that are generating this evidence so that they are able to go beyond um, generating the type of evidence that we have mostly now, which are mostly cross-sectional studies and some other forms of behavioral studies, to have more robust studies. Not to say that these studies are not valuable; they are very valuable because they are very good pointers to what works. But building capacity of people on the continent would actually increase the level of the number of evidence and the type of evidence that we will be generating.
Thank you. Dr. Gachoki, perhaps you have something to add on that?
So as a teacher, I normally don't have something to add. Yeah, one of the issues concerned with quality, as Fiona has asked, one of the issues we have realized in the ecosystem, government only listens to its own evidence. Government will mostly listen to its own, government is likely to listen to government than listen to a non-state player. However good evidence you have, the priority is to listen first of all to government. So that's one thing, that one of the solutions to that is collaboration. Then we have to attach ourselves to a state department. And one way of doing it is, let's not be pretending to solve their problems. Go to them and tell them, we know you have this data and we know you have this problem. How can we help you? Use your own data to solve your own problem. Other than tell them, Daniela and Gachoki has some data we have collected somewhere, and we indicate it can solve your problem. They won't listen to that data. So that's one thing, one problem. The other issue, the final thing is quality. Sometimes we have trust issues because of quality. We don't know, government doesn't trust Zizi Afrique or CSO's data because they think it's of poor quality. And the CSOs don't want to listen to government data because they think it's of poor quality. And sometimes also as academicians, most of us who are seated here know this, we don't want to share our tools, our methodologies, and our findings because we suspect they might expose our own quality issues. So if you know you are defective, you did not do your randomized control trial properly, the protocol was defective, then you cannot, there's no way you are going to expose yourself. So that is also one thing. So, and the only way we can do that is if we can be open and collaborate in sharing protocols, that will improve our protocols. If Alive here, this team here, and our team here can sit down and say, hey, this map you did, we can actually improve it in this way, and even include more countries. Let's get a bigger ecosystem. And let's have a protocol that can be replicated by anybody. If they feel like they want to replicate, they can replicate. So I think, Daniela, that's also something that brings trust issues. And also, of course, finally, the issue of the government feel that if CSOs take their data, they will use it to beat them, to expose the ills in the government. And therefore, they don't want to share. For example, assessment data. I always give an example in Kenya. If you were to share the data, superimpose the data on teachers' distribution and the learners, it would tell you where the teachers are and where the learners are. You see, it will expose issues of equity because teachers might be in urban areas where children are suffering in rural areas. So nobody will want you to compare that data. So what they do is they will not share that data. So there's the trust issues that it might expose even more underlying, functional and systemic issues like equity, schools with fewer resources, That is what I wanted to answer. And that's I thought I have also said how we can cure some of these things. Thank you, Daniela. And thank you, Fiona, for that question.
Thank you both. And I think that what you mentioned points also a lot to the issue of transparency. And maybe that also connects well with what you were mentioning before in the presentation about the flow of data being weak. So perhaps this point of trust is also something key have in mind for strengthening the flow of data. I had a question, but I think Andil, you have something to say. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, Charles and Rigobert, for the very great presentation. I think the work that you do is very much needed and very important. So I am from the Africa Evidence Youth League, and our work is so part of our work is to advocate for the importance of evidence use in strengthening the education sector in Africa. So we always try to ensure that the work that we do, so our advocacy work, is really informed on what is happening on the ground. So based on this work that you have done, what are some of the key messages that we should drive as the youth leaguers? Thank you.
Yeah, as Rigobert is trying to, one of the key messages we have indeed is one of them is to show where is the evidence. For example, what are the gaps? That why are we having more focus? Where our work was seminal, so I might sound like I'm not bringing out the actual key messages and findings. The key messages are to show the skewedness of within the ecosystem of where is the evidence. Ideally, if you're asking me what one key message here is, it is that we have very little evidence if we are to look at disaggregation by gender. We know, for instance, foundational learning is not gender neutral. So, but you realize that any evidence you find, all the evidence we found in the 3 countries does not disaggregate girls and boys, and probably any other gender. So it treats them homogeneously. There's very little evidence also on, for example, use of technology in improving foundational learning. I know there are the issues around that globally, whether we should introduce technology at this early age or we read book and pen and book with the talking. So that's also something. There's also the key message of, which is not a message, it's an ask. How do we engage government so that it can open its own data? The issue to once did open source, openness. Like we have this data, look at it, help us synthesize it. Let's make products out of it. Let's communicate it. Sometimes the government has very good data, but cannot even tell the public that we have this very nice data because they don't have the capacity to package it. Fiona, I'm struggling to find the exact key messages, but from the key findings, like I'm still, as an academic, I'm still concerned why we have, and nobody has answered me, including researchers, why we have more female researchers in this field of foundational learning than male researchers. What really explains that? That's something. So we raised more questions than key messages. In fact, if you ask me, we unearthed some even more serious issues. For example, the continuous funding of education in conflict areas in Cameroon, which are not in tandem with running outcomes, which are normally directed by politics of let's continue showing like we are supporting this conflict area. But you cannot continue putting that. Then the other issue is the other key message that comes out is government relying on ad hoc and sometimes political expediencies than evidence-based sort of decisions. Regimes come with something and then they want to push a certain agenda regardless of what the outcomes are. Nobody really, we don't have a continuum of beings and innovations. So one key message there is, how can we deviate from, and that's why I said ours are more questions than actually the final messages, is how can we now make government, which is the most difficult thing of changing minds, system changes and cultural changes and attitudes to adopting evidence and actually acknowledge that we got this evidence from Fiona, from Adire, and we want to use it. It's good evidence. We must learn from India. As I finish this, The first thing India did was to agree there's a crisis, learning crisis in foundational learning. Once they did that, they took steps. In Africa, we are yet to find a government that says, we find research all over. I saw a crisis in South Africa that is saying less children are taking mathematics. That's a crisis. But non-government group has come out to say we have a foundational learning crisis. Yet World Bank keeps on saying 90% cannot read. So Fiona, sorry, we might want to sit down and let's Rigobert try. Oh yeah, Ndile, thank you so much for that. We might want to sit down and repackage this into really tangible messages. But how do we transform now evidence into action? That's what I would say. I don't know whether I confused you more than Daniel. I don't know whether I confused the panel more than.
I don't know. Maybe we should ask around how are they feeling. Rigobert, did you have something to say or?
I think Charles covered it all. I mean, the two aspects I had in mind, and it was the aspect of the availability of evidence now. I mean, the ones that is available, it's accessible to inform whatever advocacy action that the Youth League will be taking. So you can build from the evidence that is there. We want that evidence to be living. So we want new research to continue feeding that evidence. So there is a research agenda that is there. You can already identify gaps. And because we have a league like this of wonderful people that are very vibrant, it's an opportunity for us to leverage on those skills and on that energy that this league can bring to actually feed into that research agenda, to actually conduct research to feed into those gaps. I mean, the gaps that we are identifying, these are the areas where we need more knowledge so that we can actually inform our policy and practice. So there is quite an opportunity for the Youth League to harness this information, but also an opportunity for us as a sector to leverage on these young people that are coming up, either by building their capacity or also by pointing them to areas where we need their energy more.
Thank you very much, Rigobert. And as we start to wrap up, we have 5 more minutes to maybe discuss a little bit about how to take this forward. So I would like to maybe invite people from the audience. I'm thinking a lot about this issue of trust that we're now discussing, and maybe someone in the audience has examples, for example, of successful steps forward in building trust to take evidence into action. Maybe someone from the audience, from your work, from what you've been doing, you have ideas of potential collaborations that could help build trust or address some of the challenges that our speakers have mentioned today. Does anyone would like to talk a little bit about that? Do you have any ideas for potential steps forward, collaborations, how to build trust? Okay, so maybe I think as we start closing our discussion, I would still like to ask one last question to our speakers in these 5 minutes that we have. And I think that I would like to hear, is there any insight that maybe you think often gets overlooked in the building living evidence ecosystems, but that you think it's very important that we start paying more attention to?
Yes, I mean, and this is for the whole ecosystem in general. Generally, local evidence tends to be underlooked, and they may not be very as rigorous as the ones we find in peer-reviewed journals, but they are very good pointers of things that can work or things that cannot work. So it's very important for us to start looking at what is available on the ground, and also to go above just contextualizing. We know we take evidence from the West, we contextualize it for our environment, but it's also very important for us to start building methods that really fit. And I'm talking about us. I'm talking about our various communities that really fits our realities, and that's what probably gave rise to various movements that we are seeing now around promoting indigenous ways of knowing, which is very important. So I think what is bottom line, what I believe is really underlooked is the power of the evidence that we have within our context, which may not be very strong, but which we can actually build on to inform policy and practice in our environment.
Thank you.
Yeah, Fiona, also something overlooked is education is the only sector where expert opinion is given by people who are not in the classroom, who are either lecturers, professors. I mean, you don't see the same in agriculture or in medicine. Doctors give advice. Practicing doctors are the ones who give advice. In education, we never listen to them. When do we really get this? And that's why we have fewer randomized trials. We don't have experimental trials from the classroom. And that's why we are borrowing innovations from elsewhere to bring to local, trying to contextualize. Yet our teachers are in the classroom correcting data every day. They are the ones who are with the learner every day. When will we start now doing that? So that's something we overrule. The teacher, that evidence in the classroom. Do we train our teachers as researchers? Those of us seated here, we are only trained how to teach. You go to a classroom with notes, teach, go out, mark work and test the exams. But we were not taught on action research. Just like a doctor is correcting data when you go there. What's your temperature? When did you start the headache? I mean, when do we, so that's something I think was also overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more minute. There's a question from Desal. I don't know if I'm saying the name correctly. He's working in the Ethiopian Public Health Institute and wishes to get training on evidence gap map. Any advance on that? Well, Fiona is already sending some links. Do you have any advice?
Yes. I mean, we can provide this. We can provide this training and this training to. Sorry, I didn't get the name right, but we've been able to go through to develop the evidence gap map, and I think I'm going to seize this opportunity to also highlight, and going back to the previous question, highlight the capacity we already have on the continent, and that we just need to continue strengthening. So yes, we can deliver, we can provide this training. There are also a couple of organizations that can provide this training and that are very experienced also with evidence gap map. You can look at the 3IE. If you go on their website, you are going to see a lot of gap maps that they have done. They are also very proficient in this space. But yes, we are always one call away. We can guide you. We can guide you on this path.
Thank you very much. So as we close, we begin to wrap up now. I think one question that stays lingering in my head after hearing the last intervention from Charles about how teachers are doing every day some sort of action research in the field that is not being documented. I was thinking a lot about also how at the maybe regional or global or national global level, sometimes we're not focusing on key things because they cannot be easily measured. So maybe it's also very interesting to start thinking about how can we start mapping also those gaps in what we're not focusing on just because it's perhaps harder to measure in education, but after all, it's also very important to keep that in mind. So I would like to leave that. It's an open question also for myself and that I am thinking a lot about now as we start closing. So now, well, I would like to thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Rigobert and Charles, for such insightful thoughts. First, I would like to invite you to give us some feedback about the Learning Forum and consider also for those that are here today, if you have any ideas of guest blogs or future session speakers and topics, please send them over to our email, hello@aliveevidence.org. We would like to encourage a lot of your participation in suggesting ideas for future sessions. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to learn more from? Or you can also present your own work. And you can also write a guest blog for Alive. And before leaving, please complete the survey that should appear in your screens now. I don't know if you can see it already. I can see it. I think everyone should be able to see it as well. Maybe if you could react with a thumbs up if you've already finished the survey, that would be great. Charles, I think the team will get back to you on that after the session, I believe. I don't know, Precious, do you see, is the feedback ready?
Some people are still filling in, so we will share it after the meeting.
Perfect. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, so I think we can move forward to the last few notes. Just a reminder of future sessions, please join us. We will have upcoming sessions on 11th June, 16th July, and 19th of August. We will have other further sessions every month. You can take a look at the topics that we're thinking that we're organizing for you. And thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Daniela. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you, Charles.
Thank you all. Bye.
Hi, thanks ever so much. It was great.